I'm going to continue today talking in as part of a series about Handel's Messiah. What was the authentic gospel according to Handel's Messiah? You know, when Handel composed the music in the 1740s, he asked a man named Charles Jennens to set up the lyrics. And Jennens, who was he was an out-of-box preacher, okay, from this standpoint. He believed in primitive Christianity, which, he had this idea that the church that was founded originally in Jerusalem in the first century was the model we should be looking at. And so that's part of the reason why Handel's Messiah is as remarkable as it is. And he was what they call a non-juror for that time in the 1700s, which means that he wouldn't swear his oath of loyalty to the King of England, to the Georges. I think at that time it was George II, if I remember correctly, correct? But anyways, let's go into it, because now this is the third part in this series. You can look in the previous couple weeks on the first couple parts of this if you haven't seen it, if you've missed it. So we're going to break in here into the alto recitative that is taken from Matthew chapter 1 and verse 23. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and called his name Immanuel, God with us. Now, I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to sing these things because, of course, it's beautiful the way that they do this. Behold, the virgin shall conceive. Well, anyways, we're not going to do that. I'm going to spare you from that. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and call his name Immanuel, God with us. In the Gospel of Matthew, the word for virgin is Strong's 3933, is parthenos. Parthenos. Properly, it is a virgin, a woman who has never had sexual relations, a female virgin beyond puberty, but not yet married. Figuratively, the Bible will use this word, parthenos, for believers who are pure, who are faithful, as it were, who are chaste, who are faithful to Christ, their heavenly bridegroom from this standpoint. And you'll find references that Paul uses that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2, and the Apostle John used it in Revelation in chapter 14 and verse 4. So when he talks about this, a virgin shall conceive, he is talking about someone. This is something that's going to be remarkable. That's what Matthew was focusing on, this whole story of Matthew bearing a son Mary bearing a son supernaturally. The other one would be more like you would think today anyways, but let's not go there. So a virgin shall conceive and shall call his name Immanuel. Where did Matthew get the idea for this? Where did Matthew decide to put this, to select this particular verse when he was talking about Christ? Well, he knew immediately there had been a prophecy before in which he picked up this and he put it right in the gospel. If you go with me to Isaiah chapter 7, I want to look at the context of the statement, because it was a little, when you see how Matthew was using prophecy, how the first century Church of God would apply prophecy, they were looking at events, things that had happened in their times, and they looked at the scriptures and the prophecy, and they said, oh, now we get something. There's something here that we hadn't fully understood before, and how it was used previously in the scriptures. So if we go in Matthew looked at Isaiah, the prophecies of Isaiah in chapter 7. We'll start with verse 5. I'm going to break in here, and I'll explain the story as we go along. And it says, in this particular case, Isaiah is writing a prophecy because Aram, which is modern-day Syria, along with Ephraim, which was the northern 10 tribes. Remember, the setting here of this prophecy is in the 700s BC. 700 BC. So we're dealing several hundred years after the kingdom had divided, after Solomon had divided, his son had come up, and his son wasn't, he was taxing the people like crazy, and the northern 10 tribes revolted, and they centered around, the prime leader was the tribe of Ephraim. They were centered in Samaria. So these, it says Aram, which is Syria, just to the north of this northern tribal confederation of the 10 tribes, they had made a league together along with Ephraim or Israel and the son of Remaliah have planned evil against you, Judah. So Isaiah is prophesying, you're going to see here, he's prophesying to the ruler of the house of David, the remaining 3 tribes that had stayed faithful to David's dynasty in the south, called Judah, which we would now, these were the Jews, saying, let us go up against Judah. These Ephraim and Syria were saying, and terrorize it, and let us breach the wall and tear it apart. Egypt is taking a portion and set up the son of Tabeel over it as its puppet king. So they wanted to, this was power politics. These northern 2 neighbors of Judah were going to say, okay, we're going to come in there and take over. We're gonna take a bunch of your riches and we're going to set up a puppet, to rule for us there. For this is what the Lord says. Okay, men have their ideas, they have their plans, they have their schemes in politics. They had them then in the 700s BC, just as they have them now in the 21st century BC. But you'll see who is the one who really controls what happens and what is the agenda, what is going to go on the face of this earth. For this is what the Lord says, Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 7, it shall not stand, nor shall it happen. Okay, it looked at that point in time, if you were a person living at that time and you looked at the situation, Judah was a relatively small kingdom. It was, by just looking at it materialistically, you say they don't have a hope. They're going to lose to this, for both the Syrians and their northern neighbors, Israel, come down and fight against them. But God is saying to him, and he's saying to the people of Judah and to the leader of Judah, it shall not stand, nor shall it happen. Verse 8, for the head, or that is the capital of Aram, is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, King Rezin. Now, within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken to pieces and will no longer be a people. Verse 9, and the head, the capital of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son, King Pekah. But then he says this, God is making this point through Isaiah to the ruler of Judah. He's saying, if you will not believe, and trust God in his message, if you will not believe, be assured that you will not be established. So God, through Isaiah, was telling this king over Judah, he says, if you don't believe, you're not going to continue to govern. You're not going to be established. In verse 10, then the Lord spoke again to King Ahaz, saying, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask a sign, one that will convince you, one that's going to show that God has spoken and will keep his word. Ahaz he wasn't really very much of a righteous person. Not at all. You would not consider him one of the righteous kings. So God speaking to him through the prophet says, ask for a sign from the Lord your God. Something that'll motivate you, that'll convince you that God is speaking to you, that God keeps his word, that you will see, that you'll develop a little bit of faith. That's like right now. There are many people. Will God keep his word? Will God keep his word? And then he adds, asking for a sign. Ask for a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. And God makes a point. He says, make your request as deep as Sheol. Okay, the deepest parts, the bowels of the earth, or as high as the heaven. Yeah, I don't care. You can, from this standpoint, tell the sun to go back. Do whatever, like Joshua did. He asked during the time when he was in trouble, when he was fighting against the enemies of the tribal confederation of Israel 700 years earlier. There they were fighting the Canaanites. He said, well, we're in the middle of this battle and we're winning. Sun, stand still, and he wanted this so that they could finish the job. And actually God did. You can go back then and look at that. And that's even, in fact, we know, when we look from the astronomical records, we said there's some anomalies that seem to account for that. Verse 13, Isaiah 7, verse 13. Then Isaiah said, "Hear then, O house of David." Okay, listen up, Ahaz, and all of your counselors and advisors who are probably standing right there. "Is it too small a thing for you to try the patience of men? Will you try the patience of my God as well?" See, Ahaz said, "I will not ask for this sign. I'm not going to ask for this sign, nor will I test the Lord." Not that he spoke the Lord's name very much when you read more of the accounts of him. But he wouldn't do it. Normally, as a minister, I would not encourage you to say, put God to the test and require a sign from him to do you. I'm not, that's not the appropriate thing for you to do. Okay, that's tempting God. See, we're mortals. He's immortal. That's not a good idea for the Almighty, the Creator. But he, in this specific case, through the prophet Isaiah, he's saying, okay, he said, ask for a sign for yourself, one that's going to convince you. Ask for a sign, that show you that God was going to keep his word, that you can trust him. And Ahaz wouldn't do it. He decided, he was thinking there, he was being a real weasel. He's saying, well, if I do that and I show it and all my people see that, and then I don't want to do this, that, and the other, it's going to make me look like a real jerk, more than the jerk I am from that standpoint. But Ahaz was trying to weasel out of this, but Isaiah said, you're a pain in the butt for all people. What, are you trying to try the patience of God as well? Anyways, verse 14, Isaiah 7 and verse 14. And then he said, well, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Okay, you're not going to ask for one. Well, we're going to give you one anyways. That's, God has decided he's going to give you one. He's already got one in mind, all right? Listen carefully. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will call his name Immanuel, which means in Hebrew, God with us. And he will eat curds and honey. Curds and honey. This is wilderness food. This is the kind of food, you'd think about later on John the Baptist might eat. If somebody who's moving around and has some cows or some dairy goats or sheep, they eat it and they make it into curds, and you eat honey. This is sort of indicating to him that there's something coming here in the future. When he knows he will eat curds and honey, when he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the child will know enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread, the Syrians and then the northern 10 tribes of Israel to the north of you around Samaria, which we would now say the West Bank type of thing, and the Golan Heights and Galilee, will be deserted. Now they're going to be deserted. Both of the people of Ephraim, the people of Syria. Well, who's going to do that? Well, let's go here. I'll show you here. If we follow on, let's just go forward here to the next chapter, to Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 1. Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 1, the Amplified Bible version. Then the Lord said to me, take for yourself a large tablet. That is something it's for public display. It's a large parchment or something that you're writing that they're going to display something. It's for public display. Take for yourself a large tablet, said the Lord to Isaiah, and said, write on it in ordinary characters. Okay, so everybody can read it. Okay, you use the common language here that everybody can read it. Belonging to Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, which is very interesting. Belonging to. See, that whole belonging to, by the way, in Hebrew is just lamed. It's an L with an apostrophe type of thing, because that was a common way, belonging to the king. You find all sorts of potsherds still, the archaeologists, or even you'll have seals that they used to put on the tax payments and things, belonging to the king, belonging to whoever they might give his name, or just the king or something. But here he says belonging to Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. Of course, we don't know what that means because we don't know the Hebrew, but it means, it is saying, he's writing, quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. So he's indicating something like quick to the plunder, swift to the spoil. That means there's something coming. This is not good news necessarily, because who's going to be plundered? Who's going to be spoiled? Verse 2. And I will get faithful witnesses to attest to this prophecy for me. And he mentions Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jerebechiah. Okay, so he's taking two credible witnesses to see him write this and make this prophecy. It's a prophecy that something bad is going to happen. Then verse 3, so I approached my wife the prophetess. And he had marital relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to a son. Then the Lord said to me, name him Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, to remind the people of the prophecy, okay? So every time, Isaiah's son would come along, that Maher-shalal-Hashbaz, it would repeat itself. So it was kind of like an ongoing, it's like taking a bus and writing it on it. So they did that. And it says this, verse 4, for before the boy knows how to say my father or my mother, and he's got to be a few years old at least to say daddy or mommy, right? 2, 3, Yep, 1 to 2, something like that. My father, my mother, the riches of Damascus, which is Syria or Aram's capital, and the spoil of Samaria, which was Israel's capital, will be carried away by the king of Assyria. Now we know, historically, Samaria was overthrown by Assyria in 722 BC. And 10 years after which was 10 years after the downfall of Damascus and the kingdom of Aram to the Assyrians, which was 732 BC. So we know about the time when this prophecy was given. Again, the Lord spoke to me saying, because these people, okay, God speaking to the prophet, which is these people, that is, the people you're living among, which is Judah. The Jews, okay, the ones who were there, who weren't going to be immediately completely wiped out by the Assyrians and taken captive like the Israelites and the Syrians to the north. Because these people, Judah, have refused the gently flowing waters of Shiloah. See, Shiloah was a perennial spring outside of Jerusalem that flowed to the pool of Siloam. This was Jerusalem's main water supply. Ahaz's son, Hezekiah, would actually build a tunnel that he would try to bring this water inside the walls of Jerusalem, because, as we'll see, the Assyrians weren't just going to leave the Jews in Jerusalem alone either. And I've actually walked through Hezekiah's tunnel, which was built shortly after this. Remarkable event when you think about how long this was excavated through solid rock, and they started from both sides, and yet they met. Well, anyways, they had some things going on. They could figure out in those days. Because these people, that is the Judeans, have refused the gently flowing waters of Siloah, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son. Okay, the big strong men, the tough guys who they were probably good-looking guys as well. They're kings. Now, therefore, listen carefully. Okay, these people trust their political rulers. Listen carefully. The ones they got right now. The Lord is about to bring on them the waters of the Euphrates River, meaning the Syrians. Just thinking of a flood. Like the Californians thinking of the mudslides that come down and, just wipe out everything in its path. All of a sudden, suddenly. Strong and abundant, the king of Assyria and all his glory, and it will rise over its channels and canals and go far beyond its banks. Then it will sweep into Judah and will overflow and pass through the hills, reaching even to the neck, which Jerusalem would be the head. And when, of course, they did this, only when the Syrians, after they'd finished with, first it was Syria, then it was the northern 10 tribes, 10 years later, then they came down and attacked Judah. They would rampage all throughout Judah, and they would destroy all the cities except for, of course, Jerusalem, reaching even to the neck, it says. And its outstretched wings, that is this flood, the outstretched wings, which is the Syrian army. And the Syrian iconography, their symbolism, they had this divine being with wings. If you look at it, they actually have quite a bit. Will fill the width of your land, O Immanuel. O Immanuel, fill the width of your land, O Immanuel. Here you have another reference. It's a land that God is with us. You'd later, if you kept on reading Isaiah, you'd have the whole account of Hezekiah and how they were actually able, God intervene on behalf of his people, that they weren't taken captive at that time. He did intervene. God was going to be with them. Didn't mean they got off scot-free. So when you have this verse that was talking about, and behold, a virgin shall conceive and shall call his name Immanuel, when Matthew used this, it had a distinct context in the prophecy of this period of time of talking about political turmoil, threats, the fact that you are having to trust God to intervene. And if you don't believe, you won't be established. Next, Handel's Messiah goes into an alto air and chorus. And you have Isaiah 40 and verse 9. We'll do that one first. That one. O thou that tellest good tidings to Zion, get thee up into the high mountains. O thou that tellest good tidings to Jerusalem, lift up thy voice with strength. Lift it up, and be not afraid. And say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. It's very interesting. O thou that tellest the good tidings to Zion, O thou that tellest good tidings to Jerusalem. O thou that tellest is properly, whoever, if you're announcing this, if you're preaching, if you're a publisher of what is glad news. The scriptures say good tidings, glad news. This is good news. This isn't fake news. This is good news. News that is fresh, news that is full, news that is rosy, okay? You think of that good news, it's rosy. It's figuratively cheerful news. We have cheerful news to tell, to good tidings to Zion. Many times, Zion, we think of this as reference to the church, to the saints, to the people of God, and to Jerusalem. So get yourself, lift up your voice with strength, lift it up, and be not afraid, and say to the cities of God, behold your God, which is literally, behold, is, in Hebrew, it's hine. Here it is. Here's your God. Here is your God. Arise, and then Handel's Messiah quotes from Isaiah chapter 16, verse 1. Arise, shine, for thy light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Arise, shine, for thy light has come. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. What was Jens thinking about when he picked this? As I said, this is the gospel according to Handel's Messiah, and it's dense. You see, there's concepts that go behind it, go in it, of what the message is. Arise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. He's citing this from Isaiah 40. But this is a theme that was picked up in the New Covenant, the New Testament writings by the apostles. And this is here what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 8. I'm going to cite this in the Holman Christian Standard Bible. And he says to the brethren, to the church, he was writing, for you were once darkness. Yeah, one time, because the Ephesians, they were Gentiles. They had grown up without God, without the hope of promises. They weren't part of the covenant community. They didn't have that background. But they had come into the church. But Paul is citing and he's saying to them, and he's quoting, for you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. And then he encourages them this, walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light results in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. That's what the fruit of the light, the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. For the fruit of the light results in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. discerning what is pleasing to the Lord. That's the fruit of righteousness. What pleases God? You know, here in the 21st century, do people make decisions about what's pleasing to God, what's easiest to do, what is politically correct? You know, we're to walk as children of the light. You know, the government of Canada here, this past week, our government, you know, they typically have a program where they'll say, okay, we'll give a variety of charities, of non-governmental organizations. We'll give them some money to hire students, you know, high school students during the summer so they can have a summer job and get that training, whatever. And usually they distribute this money and, you know, they let people do the things they want to do. Of course, they pay the minimum wage, but a job is a job, you know, when you're a kid. And just like it can be of anybody when you need one from that standpoint. But what they did this year, they told all the churches, you know, they said, you got to fill out this form first. And one of the boxes you have to check for your form to be accepted as valid is a little box that says, well, our core values, we support abortion, a woman's right to choose. Oh. For you were once darkness, but now you are light. Walk as children of the light, for the fruit of the light results in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. No, there is darkness. There is darkness. Discerning what is pleasing to the Lord. Abortion isn't pleasing to the Lord, and I hope, you know, the churches in Canada have been screaming bloody murder for good reason. Most of them. The ones that aren't so lefty liberal that it doesn't matter anymore. Verse 11, don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness, but instead expose them. So there is a point. You know, why would I say something like this? Expose the fruitless works of darkness. And our own government is engaged in fruitless works of darkness right now. And pushing this, forcing people. I mean, we're supposed to have freedom of religion. That's supposed to be part of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But they're saying, tough, if you want our money, you're going to do it our way. And we have this agenda, and you're going to follow in. Anyways, don't participate in the fruitless works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what is done by them in secret. We won't get into some of the other things they approve these days. Everything exposed by the light is made clear. For what makes everything clear is light. For the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. See? Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Everything exposed by the light is made clear. For what makes everything clear is light. Therefore it is said, get up, sleeper, rise up from the dead, and the Messiah will shine on you. Our hope of eternal life is the Messiah is going to shine on us. He's going to shine on us with his light, his truth. We are, you know, and then we walk in the children as children of the light. Walk as children of light. Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Let's go to Colossians, another one of the Apostle Paul's letters to the churches, and he was writing to the brethren at Colossae, another one, a Greek town. I'm going to cite this one in the Expanded Bible version. Colossians 1 and verse 27. God decided, that is, God chose, God willed, okay, the will of God, to let his people know this rich and glorious secret. So God decided, yeah, I want them to know, this secret. I want them to know this incredibly good secret that I have, which he has for all people. This secret, or this mystery, is that Christ lives in you. If you are a baptized member of the church, if you have repented of your sin, been baptized, and had hands laid on you, Christ lives in you, he's saying. He is our only hope for glory. Or literally, Christ in you, the hope of glory. He is our only hope for glory. See, it's the fact, the promise of what the Messiah gives us. It is our hope for glory. We have no eternal life. We have no future without God. But the scripture said, as I was quoting first, as Jennings put in the Messiah, quoting out of Isaiah chapter 60 and verse 1, "Arise, shine, for thy light is come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you." Yes, the mystery is that Christ lives you. He is our only hope for glory. Then we have the base recitative. He's going to quote from the balance of Isaiah chapter 60 in verses 2 and 3. You know, they switch singers and they get a guy in there singing because it's a little bit heavier part. This is starting verse 2. "For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall rise upon thee. His glory will be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light." That is the nations of the world. All those nations that were not Israelite, okay, who didn't have a previous covenant with God under the old covenant system. "And his glory shall see upon thee, and the Gentiles, the nations, shall come to thy light, and the kings to the brightness of thy rising." The whole fact, I want to read this whole verse here out of Isaiah chapter 60 and starting in verse 2. I'm going to quote this in the Amplified Bible version. "For in fact, darkness, which in the biblical text, in the lexicon of biblical imagery, darkness here is figuratively misery, destruction, death, sorrow, wickedness, ignorance. For in fact, darkness will overwhelm the earth, and deep darkness will cover the peoples." I can't help but feel for the people, for instance, living in the Congo. It is the heart of darkness at this point in time. You think of for all the years, the decades that now they've gone through of entering darkness, of the destruction and death and sorrow and wickedness and ignorance that has filled that place. "For darkness will overwhelm the earth." This is a prophecy of what's happening. "And deep darkness will cover the peoples." Okay, that is the situation. On the other hand, there's good news. "But the Lord will rise." You see, he's going to arise. And the Hebrew is going to rise like the sun we would expect. That's what the Hebrew word says there. "But the Lord will rise upon you." Upon Jerusalem, the city. Upon you, upon the people of God, "and his glory and brilliance will be seen on you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." So here, Isaiah is saying that there is going to be a change. There's going to be a time when things are the deepest of darkness, but all of a sudden, the Lord's going to arise. "And his glory and brilliance will be seen on you," on Zion. And as a result of that, nations will say, it'll be like all of a sudden, "Oh, what's this? Oh, everything's different. Oh, we were deceived. Oh, why were we doing that?" "And nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." Because they'll see something they can't explain. They'll see something they can't resist. They'll see something they can't fight against. Malachi, the prophet Malachi, actually makes a further comment on this. In Malachi chapter 4, in the last of the prophets, he actually took up this theme once more. Malachi chapter 4 and verse 1, because you know how the prophets worked. God used them to get his message across, and he was building a text. You see, the Bible is God's word. It's his inspiration. And he said, "Oh, I'll say this at this time. I have this need, and I'll put this in there." And he knows what he's going to do in the future too. So he's planning. He's a good script writer, because he has a movie all planned out in his head and how his will eventually be done. But in Malachi chapter 4 and verse 1, Amplified Bible version here, for behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace. Things are going to be hot. And all the arrogant, that is the proud, the self-righteous, the haughty, all the arrogant, who completely ignore the scriptures these days. They don't even care. All the arrogant and every evildoer, what's going to be the result? Shall be stubble. See, it's burning like a furnace, and all these arrogant people and every evildoer, they're going to be like stubble. And the day that is coming shall set them on fire, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. Those that choose to oppose God's will, who try to force try to cover the nations and the peoples with darkness, they're not going to be left with, they're not going to have any posterity. They're not going to have, people who continue on in their way. It will leave them neither root nor branch. And he says this in verse 2, on the other hand, but for you who honor my name, the Amplified notes, with awe-filled reverence, that's honor God's name. Some versions will have fear God's name. And it's not that you're afraid of God, although we should be afraid to do what is wrong and displeasing to God. It is to honor his name. It is to approach him and his word with awe-filled reverence. And when we read the Bible, we read it not to find a way around its implications and what it is teaching us, but to read it to find the courage to do it. That is what discipleship is all about. For you who honor my name, the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N in the text, not S-O-N, but S-U-N. There's a parallel here, obviously. The Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its rays. Rays. This is the image where the sun is coming up with rays. I think the actual Hebrew word is wings, but that is the idea. Okay, that's the imagery. And you will go forward and leap joyfully like calves released from the stall. So when God comes, when the time, even though darkness is going to overwhelm the earth and a deep darkness will cover the people, the Lord will rise like a sun upon you, upon the people of God, upon Jerusalem, upon Zion. And the nations will come to his light, and they're going to see it, and the kings to the brightness of its rising. And then the Messiah, Jennings goes into a bass air. That's the musicology there. In Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 2. Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 2. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, and they that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Okay, then we have the chorus, Isaiah 9:6. For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. This is one of the most famous lines, that come out of the Messiah. And it's always very encouraging when I hear it sung. Let's go to Isaiah for a second, just and take a look at her, and look at this, the context of this chapter that Jennings pulled this verse out of. In Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 1, I'm going to read this in the Amplified Bible version. But there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. So it's instead of misery, instead of sadness, instead of being despair, instead of being with anguish, but there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. Because at a time there's still hope. There's still hope of God's intervention. There's still hope of God's salvation. But for those, there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. In earlier times, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt. Okay, these were part of the associated tribes with Ephraim. Okay, they treated with contempt. They were conquered. The people were exiled. We read about that already earlier in these chapters in Isaiah 7 and Isaiah chapter 8. He treated the land of Zebulun and Naphtali with contempt. But later on, he will make them honored. Why? Well, who's going to be born up there in Galilee, in this land where they were? Who's going to preach up there? It's going to be Jesus of Nazareth. By the way of the sea, on the other side of Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. Okay, this is a prophecy of where Jesus was even going to be preaching. The people who walk in spiritual darkness will see a great light, and those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. Verse 3, you, O God, will increase the nation. You will multiply their joy. They will rejoice before you like the joy and jubilation of the harvest, as men rejoice when they divide the spoil of victory. For you will break the yoke of Israel's burden and the staff, or that is the goad on their shoulders. See, they're not going to be slaves anymore. And we're not just talking, of course, in the Bible, when it's the image. Yes, these people, of course, they had been, because they had not believed God. God had sent them into exile. They had been forced into slavery to the Assyrians. They were for some time, those people. But also, sin enslaves people. There's another thing. Sin enslaves people. For you will break the yoke of Israel, the chosen people of God's burden, and the staff on their shoulders. The rod of their oppressor, as in the battle of Midian. Recalling Gideon's victory earlier in the scriptures, talking about how God had delivered the people with a judge, Gideon, many years earlier. Verse 5, for every boot of the marching warrior in the battle tumult, and every soldier's garment rolled in blood will be used for burning fuel for the fire. And I see it cleaning up after a battle. God is going to break what? He's talking about, we're going to get rid of war. Verse 6, for to us a child is born. For us a child shall be born. To us a son shall be given. Then it says that what? And the government shall be upon his shoulder. The government. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, it's Messiah God, Everlasting Father, showing his covenant relationship to the people of Israel. Prince of Peace. We like that one. We quote it all the time. And there shall be no end to the increase of his government and of peace. He shall rule on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and righteousness from that time forward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish it. God is saying that this prophecy, which is incredible, and for us who are in the 21st century, it's just as incredible as it was in 700 BC during Isaiah's time, or during the time when Matthew was writing his gospel. And this is an important and essential part of the gospel. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 25. I'm going to read this in the Expanded Bible version. In the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Greek Corinthian brethren, 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 25. For Christ must rule Christ, he must reign, that he must run the government. The government is upon his shoulder. He is carrying the government. For Christ must rule until he puts all enemies under his control. Paul was citing here directly from Psalms 110 and verse 1. He's citing a Psalm of David, Psalm 110 and verse 1. And I'm going to read it, Holman Christian Standard Bible. For this is the declaration of the Lord to my Lord, David was writing. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. Rule over your surrounding enemies. Your people will volunteer on your day of battle. His people will, they're not going to desert him. They're going to say, yeah, we'll go with you. We'll back you up. In holy splendor from the womb of the dawn, the dew of your youth belongs to you. Never gets old, never gets tired. Verse 4, the Lord has sworn an oath and will not take it back. Forever you are a priest like Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings in the day of his anger. He will judge the nations, heaping up corpses. He will crush rulers over the entire world. Yeah, after a bit, you could imagine with the rising of the Lord, coming up, the nations are going to see this, and kings are going to show up. They're going to come to Jerusalem. They will come to where the Messiah is, and they're going to say, yeah, what do you want done? Verse 7, he will drink from the brook by the road, therefore he will lift up his head. So it's the whole image that David presents there, and it says is that he's coming and the government will be on his shoulder. And he's going to intervene. He's not talking about just a spiritual thing. He's talking about very clearly a physical intervention in the world affairs. Now in Matthew 22, did Jesus see himself as this? Himself? In Matthew chapter 22 and verse 41, Holman Christian Standard Bible. In this passage of Scripture, Jesus has a break. He's answering questions. He's dealing with his critics and who are trying to get him and trying to put him in a box and all this other stuff. And when he's answering, they're sitting there, they're stumped for a moment, and Jesus decides he's going to ask them a question. So while the Pharisees were together, Jesus questioned them. What do you think about the Messiah? Okay, open an innocent gambit. Oh, Messiah. Oh, yeah, we love the subject. What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he? David's, they told him. Oh, yeah, we all know that. We got that one right. We know we do. Then he asked them, how is it then that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord? Oh, the Messiah is David's son, and yet he's calling his father Lord, my master. In Hebrew culture, that is inconceivable. Dads are bosses, very patriarchal system. How is it then that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord? Notice he's saying David was inspired by the Spirit. Verse 44, like a prophet. Verse 44, the Lord declared to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. If David calls him Lord, how then can the Messiah be his son? Well, he's going back to the point that he had made them, that he clearly had said, and it was recounted by the Apostle John, before Abraham was, I am. Before Abraham was, Jesus was testifying, I am. I'm Yahweh. I'm the Messiah. See, I've been around. That's why David could say to his Lord, call him Lord. How is it that David's son, because he followed in his legacy, but he was the one who had talked to David. He was the one who had stood on top of Mount Sinai. He was the Lord. And no one was able to answer him at all from that day forward. No one dared to question him anymore because he'd stumped them. And because they were trying to deny very clearly that he was the Messiah. They were denying that he was saying, I am the I am. So this is a very interesting point. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God. That's why it fits in. The Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. I sometimes, and I do wonder how because even the Jewish people recognize this is a messianic verse, but how do you call somebody all those things? It doesn't fit their version of what they thought was Messiah, either in the 1st century or here, even in the 21st century. And in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 9, Daniel makes the point, and he says, this is a very fascinating prophecy that fits in with this. The government's going to be on his shoulders, and I kept watching, and thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. This is what Daniel saw in vision. And his clothing was white like snow, and the hair of his head like whitest wool. His throne was a flaming fire. Its wheels were blazing fire. This is quite a picture. Hollywood comes up with all sorts of CGI stuff. This is better than any of that. And a river of fire was flowing, coming out from his presence. And thousands upon thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. A picture of incredible majesty and authority. And the court was convened, and the books were opened. In verse 11, and I watched them because the sound of the arrogant words of the horn, this prophetic being who has come up, and we'll get into it just in a moment. You could read earlier, was speaking great swelling words against God. As I continued watching, the beast was killed and his body destroyed and given over to the burning fire. Talking about those who would oppose the Messiah at the end of days. For as the rest of the beasts, all these other worldly kingdoms and the governments of this world act like beasts, and you only have to watch a little bit and study a little bit of history to see how they act like beasts. So the rest of the beasts, their authority to rule was removed, but an extension of life was granted them for a certain period of time. And I continued watching the night visions, and I saw one like the Son of Man coming with clouds of heaven. The Son of Man, one of Jesus' favorite terms. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. So you get this whole picture just like you would before a king. When someone is coming to meet him, you'd have the noble lords of the kingdom escorting one in a place of honor to the king. This is the image that God is presenting. It's very familiar to people, by the way, of that time. He was given authority. Okay, this one of the Son of Man who was approaching the Ancient of Days was given authority to rule and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. And then it says his dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. So Daniel was looking at these things, and of course he wanted to know what it was all about. And he goes through a different, he goes through an explanation of explaining what his vision was. And I want to break in here to verse 21. Verse 21. And that's what I was watching. This horn, this little horn that in prophetic imagery that was waging war against the holy ones and was prevailing over them until the Ancient of Days arrived. And a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High, for the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. The government of God, the government is going to be upon the Messiah's shoulder. But he doesn't rule by himself. He has those who are going to, his people will offer themselves to him. They will volunteer to help. And they will speak, as it says, he will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. And this horn, this It's actually a spiritual religious authority, will intend to change religious festivals and laws, as Daniel mentions, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time, but the court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. Will be destroyed without root, without branch. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms under heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. That was the incredible message that was coming out of Isaiah chapter 9. You know, the government will be upon his throne, you know, talking about who the Messiah was, giving his titles. Apostle Paul said this, and we'll close with this here. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 16. Now, I'm breaking the midst of one of the Apostle Paul's very long sentences. Apostle Paul loved run-on sentences. That was his favorite thing. You know, you'd see he'd come up with a thing and add, and I can just, if the scribes who wrote for him while he was doing this, because, you know, he'd be dictating it orally and a scribe would be writing it. And it's like, Apostle Paul would be one of these people, da-da-da-da, oh yeah, comma, and then more, and this sort of thing. Because, of course, in those days, you didn't erase, right? You know, so it was a long thing. It's just how they did it. Apostle Paul, chapter 1 and verse 16. I'm going to read this in the Holman Christian Standard Bible. Paul said this to the Ephesians, Church of Ephesus. I never stopped giving thanks for you as I remember you in my prayers. I pray that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, would give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him. I pray that the perception of your mind may be enlightened so that you may know what is the hope of his calling. What are the glorious riches of his inheritance among the saints? And we were just reading about that, weren't we? Verse 19, and what is the immeasurable greatness of his power to us who believe according to the working of his vast strength? The zeal of the Lord of hosts is going to accomplish it. Verse 20, he demonstrated this power in the Messiah by raising him from the dead and seating him at his right hand in the heavens. Direct image borrowed right out of Daniel. Far above every ruler and authority, power and dominion, and every title given, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. Verse 22, and he put everything under his feet. And he's, thinking, quoting, Paul here is thinking directly of Psalm 110, quoting that whole thing. And then what Jesus had to say in Matthew 22. When he was confounding the Pharisees about, whose son is the Messiah? And how does he call him Lord? And everything is going to be put under his feet, including David, and appointed him head over everything for the church, the assembly of the called out ones, the ecclesia, the holy ones of God, which is his body. The fullness of the one, Christ in us, the hope of glory, the fullness of the one who fills all things in every way. Incredible, the gospel message that is revealed in just a few of those verses of Handel's Messiah. We'll have more to say later. Let's pray.